In the United Kingdom, the government has said that migrants who illegally enter the UK by crossing on small boats will be deported and will never be allowed to return to the UK. In a new plan, the Home Secretary, Suella Braverman, said that people would not be able to claim asylum if they illegally enter the UK by boat.
They will not stop coming here until the world knows that if you enter Britain illegally.
In Ukraine, President Volodymyr Zelensky has promised that Ukraine will find the Russians responsible for the execution of a Ukrainian prisoner of war. Yesterday, a video was spreading on social media which appears to show a Ukrainian soldier identified as Timofey Shadura, who does not have a weapon, being spoken to in Russian before he says "Glory to Ukraine" and is then shot dead. Ukraine's military has said that Shadura went missing near Bakhmut a few weeks ago. Killing prisoners of war is a war crime according to the Geneva Conventions. The Ukrainian army is continuing to defend the city of Bakhmut despite the city being almost completely surrounded by Russian forces. In Estonia's general election, the Reform Party of Prime Minister Kaja Kallas won 37 seats in parliament, more than double any other party. The Reform Party is strongly pro-EU and pro-Ukraine. Swiss chocolate company Toblerone is moving some of its production to Slovakia. Swiss law says that only products that are 100% produced in Switzerland are allowed to use any image from Switzerland, so the Toblerone bar is changing the image of the Matterhorn mountain to a general mountain. Africa. Eritrea's government has criticised a United Nations report on human rights in Eritrea, describing it as harassment and the weaponization of human rights. On Monday, the UN released a report saying that the human rights situation in Eritrea, quote, remains dire and shows no sign of improvement. According to the Democracy Index, Eritrea is one of the least free places in the world, and according to Reporters Without Borders, Eritrea is the second to worst country in the world for media freedom after North Korea. In Egypt, archaeologists have found a Sphinx statue and parts of an ancient temple. They say that the temple may have belonged to the Roman Emperor Claudius, who was alive in the 1st century, when the Roman Empire covered parts of Egypt. Some United States officials have said that they have intelligence which suggests that a pro-Ukrainian group may have been responsible for the attacks on the Nord Stream pipelines in North Europe last year. On the 26th of September, a series of explosions caused damage to the Nord Stream 1 and Nord Stream 2 pipelines, which run from Russia to Germany. However, the explosions were closer to Sweden and Denmark. Russia has blamed the United States and some European countries for the explosions, and Russia has also been accused of responsibility. However, investigations by Sweden, Denmark, and Germany have not publicized any conclusions. Yesterday, the New York Times reported that some US officials thought that a pro-Ukrainian group may have been responsible, possibly without the involvement of President Volodymyr Zelensky or Ukrainian officials. The New York Times also said that it is still not clear how the explosions were caused. In Mexico, 2 United States citizens were found dead yesterday, with 2 more found alive. It is believed that the group of US citizens were shot at in an attempted kidnapping after they crossed into Mexico for a medical procedure. Also in Mexico, over 430 migrants were found alive in an abandoned lorry trailer in the state of Veracruz yesterday, including over 100 unaccompanied children. Asia. In Bangladesh, an explosion in an office building has killed at least 15 people and injured more than 100. It is not clear what caused the explosion in the capital, Dhaka. Israeli soldiers killed 6 Palestinians in the West Bank city of Jenin yesterday, according to the Palestinian Health Ministry. Israel said that one wanted terrorist was among the 6 Palestinians who were killed when Israeli forces exchanged fire with Palestinian gunmen. And in Japan, some sushi restaurants are stopping their traditional conveyor belts, which deliver food to guests around the restaurant. Restaurants have been turning off the conveyor belts because of social media videos showing people touching and licking food before putting it back. Sushi chain Choshimaru has turned off the conveyor belts at all 63 of its restaurants. And everywhere in the world today is Women's Day. A big thank you to Ilona from Czechia and Henri from Guatemala for becoming our newest supporters. If you'd like to help to support the podcast and have access to the transcripts of every episode, then go to send7.org.
So there you have it, the Secretary laying out the challenges. And right now the West, including, of course, the United States, is absorbing an influx of Ukrainian refugees who are escaping Russia's brutal war. But there are also concerns that Putin is weaponizing migrants in an effort to destabilize Europe and other nations supporting Ukraine. My next guest is the Lithuanian Foreign Minister, Gabrielius Landsbergis. As you can see, his Baltic nation is in a very difficult spot between Russian territory and Russia's ally, Belarus. But Lithuania is a David, of course, facing 2 Goliaths, also in a standoff with China over trade. And Landsbergis is joining me here in Washington after meeting with his U.S. counterpart, the Secretary of State, Antony Blinken. Welcome to the program.
Pleasure being here.
I don't know whether this wind is a little bit sort of apocryphal or metaphorical for the turbulence that's going on around many of these issues. So you have just been meeting with Secretary of State Blinken. The White House, the U.S. administration talks a very good game and provides a huge amount of defensive weapons to Ukraine. Do you think it's enough? What did you tell your counterpart?
Well, first of all, I had a chance to thank Secretary Blinken for what we've seen U.S. doing over the last year. Many of us feared that U.S. has left the European continent, pivoting to Asia and seeing the problems elsewhere. But now U.S. is back. And then guaranteeing not just the safety of eastern flank countries of NATO, but also assisting Ukraine. Mm-hmm. First of all, to defend Kiev, fend off the first attacks, and then sustain the war effort throughout the year.
What do you think it'll take? Now we're into the second year. You all discussed, everybody met at Munich to presumably discuss how you take this forward for another year if Putin doesn't decide to remove his troops. You see the really difficult time Ukraine is having over Bakhmut. How do you, as Lithuanians, assess the battlefield right now?
Well, my point is that we should, our strategy should not be driven just by the tactics of the battlefield. It might be very difficult one day. Last autumn, we've seen some very successful moves by Ukrainians taking back 2 major cities in the east and south. And I would like to see more discussion about the end game. We're saying that we're committed to Ukraine until, with whatever it takes, until the very end. And I'm asking the question, so what is that end?
So you don't know either, because we ask that question all the time.
We know. We know. And President Zelensky knows very well.
Which is?
He presented a very clear 10-point peace plan, which has taken all the territories back, so full withdrawal of Russia from the occupied territories, reparations, and justice. And I think that even these 3 points, they state out very clearly what it means to secure the European continent once, well, hopefully for all, so that it would be back again into the framework of security.
Do you believe that your fellow NATO, maybe slightly Western Europeans, certainly the United States here is even further away, do you believe there is a growing or a diminishing attempt to get Ukraine to the negotiating table?
I think that there are several worries. One of those worries, and one might call them myths, even about whether it's wise or even it's possible for Russia to fail and lose. And I've heard that a number of times in closed rooms and more open rooms where people would say, look, Russia cannot fail. Putin has to have some kind of victory out of this. And my point is that if he is going to have any kind of victory, then we have not seen the last of it. The second myth is that Ukraine is unable to win. Then again, we've heard that since the first days of war, where the belief was that Ukraine will not be able to hold Kiev, and they were. That they will not be able to use HIMARS, rocket launching systems, and they were, and they pushed Russia out. So I have full confidence that if we put enough belief into Ukrainian soldiers and political leadership, they actually can do this.
And quickly, right?
That's not necessarily what we should be aiming at.
Okay.
Quickly, it puts a lot of pressure. And I don't think that it's always possible to withhold that. So that means that we need to give them space and time. So obviously now everybody's waiting and expecting probably the counteroffensive. Ukrainians are quite openly talking about this, even naming directions as to where that might happen. But my point is that let's commit to the second counteroffensive. There might be need for the second and third, and let's stick with them.
Do you think planes will be part of an eventual second or third counteroffensive? Because now we're hearing more and more that it's bound to happen.
Yeah.
Question is when?
I think that it's an important step forward. We've always been of the opinion in the Eastern Flank that all the weapon systems should be made available to Ukrainians. So I would not be surprised in seeing F-16s. But apart from that, I think that it's very important also not to lose sight of what they need currently. So they need more tanks, they need more ammunition, they need more howitzers and all the other systems that maybe do not sound so flashy in the headlines, but this is what their soldiers need right now. You
were starting to describe a number of myths that you've actually tweeted about. You got to 2 or 3. Myth 5, if I could just read it for you, please. Your words. We can go back to business as usual with Putin. That's myth 5. Reality, Putin is far too heavily vested in the crusade against the West. He cannot turn back. He sees our peace offerings as weakness and uses them against us. He should be in court, not in power. How do you see that happening? I think that the major difference between the narratives is if somebody suggests that we should be negotiating with Putin, and I think how do we reconcile that with the idea of special tribunal? You cannot have both. You cannot have somebody who is actually guilty for act of aggression, for ordering his generals and troops commit war crimes, and then sitting at the same table to negotiate, a ceasefire or seizing of territories. You have to decide. And again, if we show that we're not sure whether there has to be a special tribunal, where there has to come a point in time where justice will be served to all the officials who are responsible for this war, then it is taken as a sign of weakness, that we are indecisive, that maybe, there are options and ways out of it. It is said that your states, the Baltic states, yourself and your other 2, Latvia and Estonia, and also East European countries like Poland, have the kind of experience with Russia and the Soviet Union that sets you apart from countries further west. Do you sometimes feel alone? Do you feel like, alone? We had that feeling in 2000s when we had that feeling when the restart
was offered to Russia when we said, look, it's still the same imperialistic state or empires, I might even call, which more resembles empires of 19th century than the modern European country. That they have this attitude towards their neighborhood, which is not peaceful. They see spheres of influence. They want to stop countries joining NATO because it somehow affects their security when we're just talking about our security. So this is when we felt alone. Now I believe that there's a lot more convergence towards the understanding of what Russia actually is. I don't think that we're there yet, completely grasping what it is Russia and how Baltic states and Poland sees Russia. Just to give you an example, the main point that we are always discussing is that is it politics for you? And we say it's not a political point for us. It's a vital point. We are worried when we see Bucha, when we see Irpin, when we see civilian buildings destroyed. We think about our cities. We think about our people, and this is what we want to defend. So there is this difference.
Talking of your own security, I mean, it's never separate from what's happening right now, but even before this war, you had called for more defensive emplacements by NATO along the eastern flank. And you keep calling for it, and this at the last NATO meeting in Madrid, it seemed to have been pledged. And I'm not sure whether it actually ever happened. And again, I asked at this Munich conference, the Secretary General of NATO, what about all these, what was mooted as tens, if not hundreds of thousands of NATO forces in a defensive posture, a deterrent posture along. This is what he told me.
What we have decided is to have battle groups. They're already there in all the Baltic countries and in all the Eastern Allied countries, 8 battle groups in 8 countries. Then we are now in the process of making them scalable to have air-marked forces, brigades that can be that will train, have pre-positioned equipment, and then can be quickly deployed. But even more important is, of course, that we will have then hundreds of thousands of troops that will be available for reinforcement. I think if there's anything I learned from Ukraine is that you need to be able to move your forces quickly to where they are needed. So we don't have to deploy everyone in one specific place, but have high readiness, pre-positioned equipment. And then these troops we have in the Baltic countries are also backed by substantial naval and air forces.
In Ukraine tonight, officials say Russian forces are suffering heavy losses as they launch dozens of attacks around the embattled city of Bakhmut. During an exclusive interview with our Wolf Blitzer, President Zelensky explained why Bakhmut's defenders are refusing to retreat.
I want to start with the battle for Bakhmut. Ukraine has put up a tremendous fight and inflicted massive losses on the Russian side. But in recent days, Russian forces have made some critical gains there. Why have you decided not to withdraw from Bakhmut?
We understand what Russia wants to achieve there. Russia needs at least some victory, a small victory, even by ruining everything in Bakhmut, just killing every civilian there. They need to put their little flag on top of that to show their society. It's not a victory for them. It's more like, like to support, to mobilize their society in order to create this idea of there's such a powerful army. For us, it's totally different. This is tactical for us. We understand that after Bakhmut, they could go further. They could go to Kramatorsk, to Slavyansk. And it would be an open road for the Russians after Bakhmut to other towns in Ukraine, in the Donetsk direction, in the east of Ukraine. That's why our guys are standing there.
Wolf also had a chance to get President Zelensky's reaction to that incredibly disturbing video that appears to show Russian troops executing a Ukrainian prisoner of war.
As you know, Mr. President, a very disturbing video has emerged in recent days appearing to show the execution of a Ukrainian prisoner of war by the Russians. This soldier has now been identified. He was fighting, as you know, near Bakhmut. And I want to warn our viewers right now, we'll play a little clip. This is graphic. Watch this. His last words were, Slava Ukraini, glory to Ukraine. What goes through your mind, Mr. President, watching that truly horrific execution of your soldier?
Це і є
This is the show of the Russian attitude towards POWs. They don't have any laws of war or international law or any conventions. It's a question that these people, they don't respect anything. They don't fight like soldiers. For us, it's a war for our freedom, for democracy, for our values. For them, it's a terrorism. That's the attitude. And they post these videos. They just killed a guy who refused to surrender, and he said, "Glory to Ukraine." That's where you go. This is the face of this war. This is the face of the Russian Federation.
Let's get an update now from the war zone, where CNN senior national security correspondent Alex Marquardt is standing by for us. Alex, you heard President Zelensky warn that capturing Bakhmut would give Russia an open road through eastern Ukraine. Tell us what the latest is there on the ground.
Well, Brianna, what's interesting is that echoes exactly what we have been hearing on the ground. When you go close to Bakhmut and you speak with Ukrainian forces there, they say exactly the same thing, that we're defending this city. We've spent months defending this city because if they take it, it could provide a launching off point for Russia to push deeper into Ukraine. Now, what is interesting is that we've already started hearing Ukrainian and some U.S. officials actually say that if Bakhmut were to fall to the Russians, that it would not be that strategic a victory, that it would actually be symbolic. But here we have President Zelensky saying this actually would be a strategic victory for Russia were they to take it. Now, I think some people would push back against President Zelensky about that notion of an open road, because we do expect Ukraine to dig in to the west of Bakhmut. We have seen trenches being dug if Bakhmut were to fall to the Russians. We know that there would be fierce resistance. We know that Ukraine has done a very good job at degrading those Russian forces. NATO estimated that for every 5 Russian soldiers who was killed or died, just one was a 5-to-1 ratio. So it is unlikely that Russia would be able to press forward too aggressively were they to take Bakhmut, at least in the near future. As for what's happening right now, Brianna, those Russian forces led by the Wagner mercenary group, they are still trying to encircle Bakhmut. They have made some gains to the north of the city. They have pressed into the city from the east. They have had some successes, but we did hear the head of Wagner, Evgeny Prigozhin, complaining that his forces are not getting enough ammunition from the Russian military. We are seeing much more of a gap between the Russian military and Evgeny Prigozhin. Prigozhin also saying that they are seeing more Ukrainian forces coming in to reinforce and try to push them back. We have heard from President Zelensky saying that that is going to be their posture. They are going to continue to defend, and on the recommendation of his top generals, they're going to reinforce those defenses, that they have no intention of withdrawing at this point, Brianna.
All right, Alex Marquardt in eastern Ukraine, thank you for that report. And a note to our viewers that you can watch Wolf's full conversation with the Ukrainian president tomorrow night at 9 Eastern right here on CNN. This is all part of a CNN primetime exclusive event, the Zelensky interview, hosted by Wolf Blitzer. And coming up, new court documents just filed in the $1.6 billion lawsuit against Fox News. We'll share what we're learning right after the break.